So it's really great seeing everybody. And can everybody hear me okay?
Yep,
Good?
we hear you
Okay,
good,
great.
Rose. Thank you.
Great. So we wanted to first talk about, Laura and I, what we're going to be presenting today, because I know with a lot of the things that have been happening lately that sometimes there's confusion of what we're going to be doing and what we're talking about. So today we are going to be talking about a big idea that's called supporting use of Tier 3 or individualized evidence-based interventions in schools. And this is a bit of a systems approach. So I know that some of you were asked prior to registering a little bit more about what you know about this subject and what you want to know. And just to let you know that we're not going to go over individual practices. We're going to show you a practice and show you how we evaluate individualized practice for its inclusion of evidence-based features. And these are things that we would hope you would like to consider when you're starting to plan for your Tier 3 supports in your school, in your district, wherever your physical base is going to be where you're going to implement your Tier 3 supports. So if some of you were hoping this would be about virtual use of Tier 3 or some other topic of Tier 3, we certainly understand if you decide, you know, I have something else to do in this hour instead, and you still have access to the handouts that we are giving you, but we certainly understand if you were hoping it was something else. For some of us who are interested in doing this virtually, how to do Tier 3, I am a director of a clinic where we do provide direct support to teachers, schools, families. And if you have my email address on this first slide, I noticed Laura's isn't there, so don't go contact Laura. No, I'm sure she would give it to you. She remembered to put it there. But my email address is on the first slide. You are welcome to email me because we are planning to do some virtual office hours, which would be kind of like asking questions about general use of how to do Tier 3 individualized interventions in the home, since that's where most of our children are right now. And we're also planning on providing more support. So how can you support families to implement their child's behavior intervention plan in the school, in the home. So those are some things we're going to be talking about through the clinic. And if you can email me when we are ready to have some presentation on that, we can let you know. Okay, so we're going to go ahead. What you have is, you have this PowerPoint presentation. You have most of this PowerPoint presentation. I just added one extra slide. And then you also have a couple of documents. You have this matrix. This is your template to use, and we're hoping that during this chat you might write down, when we cue you to write down a Tier 3 intervention you have been using in your school or your setting or your district, that you're going to be able to evaluate whether that intervention or support that you're implementing actually meets these 5 features. And those 5 features, which we are now calling the 5 C's, are the things that we're going to talk about. And what we're going to do is, there is a sample that we also gave you, in which we're going to go over an evidence-based Tier 3 intervention called Prevent, Teach, Reinforce. It's a functional behavior assessment, behavior intervention plan process. What we're going to do with that support is, we have showed you on this matrix a little bit of an example of how this support meets all 5 of the features. And I'm going to show that a little bit more with Laura on the presentation. But those are the 3 documents you should have access to. It may be that you'll have to go to a link that was given to you to be able to download these. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is just what I told you. We're going to talk about the framework of practices, or these critical features, and then we're going to alignment, actually, that's an error, alignment of 1 individualized evidence-based intervention. I originally had 2 in there, but I thought the chat was 90 minutes long, and even though I can talk fast, I can't talk that fast, so I had to take out 1. So I apologize. If you want to know more about another intervention, you can also email me. Before we start, I always like to have humor, and especially nowadays, we need humor. And some of these tweets you may have seen, but I think it's very interesting. I think one of the things, if we think about anything that's positive that might be coming out of this situation we're all in, I think educators are going to be much more appreciated after this. And these are two tweets I thought that were really funny. One was, so far during quarantine homeschool, all I've taught my kids is about 37 new swear words. I just love that one. And then the second one, gave me a good chuckle. Today, our 5-year-old is wearing a shirt that says genius, but he put it on backwards. So yes, homeschooling is going great. So with that in mind, let's talk about Tier 3. Well, today, these are evidence-based interventions in which we're going to be talking about Tier 3. Of course, you know the infamous triangle. We are going to be at the tippy top where hopefully the concept is there are fewer in need of these supports, and that's good because these supports take much more resources than others. So one of the things to think about is I get questions often about, well, yeah, what is a Tier 3? What is a Tier 2? What is a Tier 1 intervention? And to get us to thinking in the same language, Tier 3 is individualized. And what that means is it is a support that is meant to meet the unique needs of one specific student. And I think those two words that are bolded are important. Unique needs mean this is not a packaged approach. This is not something you buy that you can implement with everyone. This is a way that you assess what is the unique need of this one student and what are those supports that student needs in order to be successful. And you're going to develop those supports to meet that need of that one student. Now, granted, some of the things will work with other students. However, there may be some variations or refinements made, and every student's need may have a different reason about why they need that support. So the Tier 3 really goes down into the unique needs of one student. There's a lot of challenges that we do understand with implementing Tier 3 or individualized supports. Frankly, when some of you were asking about strategies, basically, they're all out there. There are a lot of evidence-based interventions, especially when we're talking about behavioral supports, as well as, let's say, for students with specific disability, such as autism, who often need individualized support. So we already know what the evidence-based interventions are. The issue is we're not implementing them. And it's not because for want of trying, let's say that. For example, there are 27 evidence-based interventions for students with autism. And in behavioral support in Tier 3, FBAs and function-based support plans have decades, at least 20 years, if not more, of research that show that they are effective. However, we're not seeing them implemented in the way that they were intended. Sometimes it is because the training needs are so high and we're unable to provide the teachers or educators with the support that is necessary in order for them to be able to implement the interventions with fidelity. Sometimes the environmental context in which they're being implemented doesn't allow for something that takes more resources or more time. Some of the studies that have been done in some of these cases might have been done in an ideal setting, like a clinical setting. So how do you translate that into a real world situation like schools? The other thing is, even though we have these evidence-based interventions, the diversity of the presentations of the needs are very wide. There's a continuum of presentations. You have students with very mild, maybe only 1 or 2 problem behaviors, whereas others may have multiple behavioral concerns that are done across the day in multiple settings, may all have different antecedents and different functions. And how do you come up with a training and a way to be able to adapt an evidence-based intervention that we could train you in that would meet all the needs of this very heterogeneous population? And then we also go, of course, adults are definitely more willing to do things when they feel competent in doing them and have faith and trust that this is going to work. And I think that the association with many teachers in some of our Tier 3 based interventions have been, they don't work. I've tried these, things don't work. And sometimes it's because of the way we get at them and when we do them and how we do them, and again with the fidelity and the complexity. So that leads into there's not the support, the resources. I often get told that if that something can't be done in an hour, they're not going to do it. And like, oh, I don't know of any magical intervention out there that fixes a student's problem behavior in an hour. If you find it though, please let me know, because I'd like to learn how to do that. For some of the cases, especially for kids with autism, for example, we know we have a lot of competition with people who don't have evidence-based interventions, and families often want to access those because they see these wonderful testimonials, and they of course want that for their child. And then basically there's a lack of frameworks, because it's easy to just pick and choose interventions, but unless a district or a school or a system has a framework for how to select them and how to evaluate them, they're not going to be sustained. So we have our little pictures there. So one thing that you might want to take out one of those matrices, if the blank one, and if you didn't get a chance to download it and you're feeling like right now, I don't feel like downloading it, I'm okay with that. Maybe on a piece of paper or on your computer in a Word document or something. What I'd like you to talk about is think about 1 Tier 3 support or intervention or strategy that you're currently implementing in your school or your district. And then what I'd like you to do in the chat box is talk about what barriers exist in your setting to doing it well or to having it be effective. And somebody is monitoring the chat box, I'm hoping. I probably can do that as well.
Hi, Rose, it's Therese. Yep, I am watching for you.
Okay, great. And some examples of strategies, just in case you're thinking I'm a newbie at this. So if you're doing functional behavior assessment, developing behavior intervention plans from those functional behavior assessments. Are you doing things like therapeutic interventions? So for example, you have a student who has some counseling needs and needs to get therapy. Are you doing some therapeutic type of strategies? I saw somebody said they need anger management. Do you have a student that you're trying to do some cognitive behavior therapy for anger management? Or some students who, and I know that right now they're all at home, but before they went home, some students who have anxiety are doing coping cat maybe, or something that you've been trying to do with your students, and then tell me what your barriers are.
So Rose, we're hearing from some participants that they're doing CFBA, Fidelity of Implementation of the BSP, Behavior Support Plan.
Okay.
They're doing wraparound with family engagement.
Okay.
Or maybe family engagement was the barrier. I'm not sure there. We've got another participant saying that one intervention they use is individual counseling. Since school counselors may have different styles of counseling and different personalities, the implementation across the district is not going to be the same, and therefore it has an impact on student data. Yeah, so another one, we have a barrier that's identified. They're struggling with school psychologists, social workers, and behavior interventionists getting on the same page on who does the FBA and things like that.
Ah, that's always interesting. I have had a lot of experience with the FBA, and usually, you know, you think they'd be fighting, why don't you do it instead of us? Somehow maybe they or that might be part of the struggle is maybe this is your kind of thing. Well, we're going to talk about one of the features that hopefully would help that argument.
Excellent. So the other input that we got here is providing RTI support so students can gain the access to different techniques before having an IEP. Then some other comments about group counseling, impulse control, social skills, building positive rapport with parents is a struggle, and FBA BIP inconsistency in implementation of the plan across the district and getting family engagement. So we'll go ahead and close the comments on that question so you can move forward with the content.
Thank you, and thank you for your participation. Wonderful. So I'm going to go over the critical features, and the rest of this we're going to be talking about these critical features, and we're going to show you an FBA BIP model that has evidence base that is implemented consistently across the districts and across the schools if being done with fidelity. And we're going to take turns talking about the 5 C's, and then you're going to evaluate your evidence-based intervention to see whether or not it includes the 5 C's. So the first one, and we're going to describe these and define them in the next few slides. So I'm just going to tell you the 5 C's right now, and then we're going to talk about PTR, which is our evidence-based intervention for demonstration. So the first one is an evidence-based Tier 3 intervention should be collaborative. It should be comprehensive. It should be customizable. It should be coachable, which means we can coach teachers, we can coach school psychologists, guidance counselors, we can coach others to do this, families. And it should have contextual fit with the person who is implementing it. So here is that matrix again that we're hoping that you just use to write down your evidence-based Tier 3 intervention. But again, if not, you can use this in the future, and you can still go back when we're doing our chat and think about your evidence-based intervention to see whether or not it meets these 5 criteria. This is the example of PTR and how it meets these 5 criteria. So let me tell you a little bit about PTR for those of you who might not be familiar with. This is a multi-step FBA BIP process that has been manualized or standardized. That means the process, whoever is the coach and is guiding a team to do this process, whether the team is 2 or 3 people or more, or just the coach and the teacher, it is a process that is done consistently across all coaches and teachers and families and other educators who are part of the team understand and know what to expect in this process. So it does deal with that inconsistency that some of you have mentioned in the chat box. And so it starts with the team, which is in the center, where 3 levels of knowledge are represented, including the coach, who has the level of knowledge of functional behavior assessment, behavior intervention plan, and the behavioral principles that underlie that process. We have members on that team who know the student well, or the child, and members who know the context, the school, the district, the community, the home, whatever the context is in which the functional behavior assessment intervention plan will be implemented. The multi-steps, and we're not going to be able to talk about all the steps today. We're going to briefly go through them. Is step 1, we first talk about with the team and come to consensus on what are the behaviors we want to see less of and more of, how to come to a consensus on the definition, and then prioritize the behaviors that we're going to focus on for the intervention. We also, during this step, develop a very teacher-friendly or family-friendly, if we do this with the families, that uses a daily progress monitoring system that only takes about 5 seconds to do, and is also very useful in evaluating whether or not behavior is responding to interventions. In step 2, we analyze the problem, the behavior problem or behavior concern, by completing our functional behavior assessment and coming to consensus on the hypothesis. We synthesize the information from multiple sources to be able to come up with a hypothesis. And then in step 3, we are now going to have the team select interventions that align with the hypothesis, and the coach helps guide the team to select interventions that best match the hypothesis, but also are interventions that are feasible and acceptable to do in the context of whoever is doing the intervention plan. And then the coach is going to help the teacher develop the procedures of each of those strategies, which we call task analysis. That coach then sets up time to coach or train the teacher to do the plan. So we do what's called behavior skills training, and train the teacher, get performance feedback, get role play practice, and then we move into active coaching, which is supporting the teacher for the next few weeks as they're implementing the plan with the student, and providing at least one visit a week where we do performance feedback. And then in step 4, we come back to, as a large team, and talk about the data, both the fidelity data as well as the student outcome data, and make some next step database decisions. So that's our process in a nutshell. If you want to know a lot more about it, you can email me. We do have research supporting that this is evidence-based. There have been 2 randomized controlled trials thus far, and several single subject designs, and all of this research, the outcomes have been positive. Both randomized controlled trials showed significant differences in students who were part of the PTR intervention group compared to students who received services as usual. And the effect sizes were moderate, so it was pretty much appreciated that we got that good outcome on both randomized controlled trials, and all the single subject, they're all multiple baseline designs, and all of them showed improvement in the dependent variables in the direction that they needed to go. Teachers implement the interventions with high fidelity. Usually our mean is between 80 to 100%. We get a lot of 100% fidelity scores. Both teachers and students find PTR to be acceptable, effective, and feasible. So that's a snapshot. We're going to show you little snippets of PTR now to show you examples of how it's collaborative and how it meets all these features. So Laura is now taking over for the collaborative feature.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
First thing we're going to talk about is collaborative. And if you think about that matrix that we have, this would be one of the boxes that you can think about your own tier 3 practices. So when we think about collaborative, we think about intentional. It's not just that we have a team, but that we are working together as the team, which means gathering input from multiple sources, which could include families, could include students, and includes other members of the team, that we make the decisions consensually, which means that as a team, so when we actually put the intervention in place, we have sort of a consensus of how we're going to do that. If we're consulting or coaching, that we are asking questions, providing options, and giving choices to the people involved. And finally, that we're building some sort of relational trust as we go along to make that team work in a collaborative process. Next slide. So the biggest thing is that when we're collaborating, we want to stop and we want to listen. We don't want to just be saying, here's what we do, but more of, here are some options and what does the group want to do together. Here's an example when we're thinking about PTR, so now we're getting a little bit more into our specific intervention, is that we want to have a goal set. We don't want to necessarily go in and say to the team, this is the behaviors we want to target. Instead, we want to have discussions and get input from multiple people to reach a consensus on which behaviors we want to target. Here's an example of working with a student. So a lot of times when we think about tier 3, we are literally working directly with students, but we don't always seek their input. So here's a couple of questions from PTR. When we ask about their dreams, how do they reach those dreams? Who's involved? What type of choices do they make on a daily basis? Because that is becoming part of our intervention package. And who is important in their life? Who would be part of that intervention? And then when we look over on the other side, when we do the goal setting with that student, we ask what behaviors do they wish they'd like to see more in school and what would they like to see less? And then we put those target behaviors and then we define those. What do those look like for the student in that setting? And that becomes part of that collaborative process with the team. When we think about meeting for a team, we have a set agenda. So we might have what we're going to do today, what are things we're going to do later. We have where we're going to meet. So we have that clear where people will show up and know where it's going to be. We have action items and who's going to be in charge and when they're going to do it. So it's not just one person with behavioral expertise, but the group coming together and working. And then at the end, we have some self-reflection about what went well, what can we work on. And again, supporting that team-based process. So let's just take a minute now and in the chat box, think about the tier 3 you're using, whether it's PTR or whatever systems you are using in your schools. How are you meeting the collaborative component, or what would you like to embed in the future? Are you incorporating students and families? What would you like to work on for this part of the process? If you would type in the chat box, that would be great. Yeah, I see a bunch of people are talking about family and student voice and choice. Yeah, and choice especially is a really good evidence-based practice to include in that, to have those students and teachers have some ownership in it. And family engagement, I mean, think about how many times do we actually invite our families to participate in our tier 3 processes. processes. Great that there's some discussion during our weekly meetings. That's great, because that also then brings it to other people in the school to bring attention to students that might need more support. I think, Rose, you can move on to the next section. Really great discussion, guys. Thank you so much for participating.
Okay, so the next, thank you, Laura. The next C in the feature is comprehensive. You know, kind of like when we go on, when we used to do this in our lives, got to go on vacations and other places, right? Like that woman up there, she's looking so like exotic right now. And you get an all-inclusive vacation. And all-inclusive means that everything is included. So think about that and think about tier 3 supports. Everything should be included. You shouldn't be adopting supports in which you're gonna have to be like thinking, oh, they forgot to tell us how to measure fidelity, or they forgot to give us a way to collect data. And so now you're gonna take more of your own resources to have to create some of these things. So this is a process in which all of the components are included, and there are multiple components because tier 3 is not just a one-shot deal or kind of like a fast package kind of a program, but again, it's going to have multiple components to be able to completely address and hopefully have that student be successful. A lot of times it will include how to do precision teaching, because a lot of this will involve teaching, even with behavioral supports, with our functional behavior assessments, and then our behavior intervention plans. We're going to teach those behaviors. So how does PTR do this? Well, first we talked about, we do conduct a functional behavior assessment. So we have an assessment approach that develops a hypothesis, which then leads us to a selection of interventions. In PTR, it's comprehensive in that we include a list or a menu of interventions from which the team can select. And every plan, every PTR intervention plan should include at least one intervention that is preventative, which modifies the antecedent or the triggers, that teaches a new replacement skill. So that's a second intervention that should be included. There should be a minimum of one reinforced intervention that reinforces the replacement behavior and honors the function, because that's why we do a functional behavior assessment, to identify the function. We want to make sure that that function gets honored, but with the new skill that we're teaching. And then we have to have at least one intervention that changes the way we respond to problem behavior so that the student no longer gets the function by doing the problem behavior, but instead only gets the function by doing the replacement behavior. The PTR approach includes all of the forms and tools you need, the intervention menus. Those interventions each have an appendix that describes the intervention. And I think in a later slide, I actually show some examples of appendices so that you can have help in task analyzing the intervention as a coach. It has coaching scripts on how to work with teams so that you're able to achieve the goals of each step. Daily progress monitors, a way to do fidelity, as well as provide performance feedback to teachers, and how to make database decision rules. So everything is included within this approach. So this is an example of the PTR FBA checklist. We have multiple versions of the checklist. So this is an example of what we give to teachers who are part of the team, and they will complete this for the problem behavior that they prioritize and identified as the primary concern. Every teacher completes their own, with the coach going in and observing, and the coach then synthesizing all the information from multiple sources. From this, we make a hypothesis, and this is an example of one of our students we've worked with. We're going to call him Jeff, and we do both the appropriate and inappropriate behavior hypothesis. So the top is when Jeff's presented with demands to start non-preferred academic tasks, specifically independent writing. He walks around the room. The second column, as you can see, is his behavior, which they kind of titled that disruptive behavior. Those are all the behaviors they said were disruptive. Jeff is a general education student, so his behaviors seem to be a lot milder than some of the behaviors I'm used to working with. And as a result of this, he avoids or delays the non-preferred tasks. This all came from the functional behavior assessments that his two teachers completed, plus the direct observations. If you notice in PTR, we also at the bottom do provide an appropriate behavior or replacement behavior hypothesis. We have this saying when, because he's still going to be asked to do writing tasks, because he has to be asked to do writing tasks. Instead, though, of walking around the room to escape or avoid or delay the task, we're going to teach him instead to be academically engaged. So replacing the behavior that's a problem with academic engagement and independent completion of tasks. As a result of doing that, he is going to earn or get a reinforcement of avoiding and delaying. We'll show you later on. I think Laura gets the luxury of showing you how he does that. This is an example of our elementary PTR intervention checklist that teams use and coaches help guide, in which they are then able to rank order interventions with mandated interventions. As we said, they have to have a replacement behavior in the middle, and they have to have a reinforcement of the replacement behavior, and they have to respond differently to problem behavior. Each of these interventions does have an appendix that describes them, and here's examples of our appendix. So this is an example for the first intervention on prevent, which is providing choices. This template is used for all of the interventions, gives you a definition, when you use the strategy, a rationale for this, when your FBA information says this, why you would do this, examples, and then steps for implementation. So this helps with the task analysis. And then supporting evidence so that you know this, it has had studies done to show that it is effective at preventing problem behavior, and also implementation considerations, things that you have to think about if you're going to select this intervention and implement it to make sure it's going to be successful. We also have fidelity measures. Now this is a more general one. We have easier ones than this, but if you want to have the same fidelity measure in your district or your school that's used for everybody who's implementing a behavior intervention plan, so you can compare no matter what intervention is being given, this would be an example of what you can use. And we also have a little bit more in there. If you don't just want adherence or accuracy, we can also look down at the bottom and see what the quality in which that intervention was delivered. We also, when you start getting into fidelity, you want to see whether or not the student's responsive to the intervention. So this also includes a section for student responsiveness. And rather than sticking to a yes, no, it was done or it wasn't, sometimes there's some interventions that it's not quite a yes or a no answer. So this also helps with giving you a Likert scale so that you can rate about how well and how accurate it was done, as well as the quality of it. And then
Hey,
this
Rose.
is, I'm sorry. I know
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
because I was trying to get finished. Sorry.
No problem. We just had a question from one of the attendees. They're asking if the PTR model breaks down, or the forms that you're showing, do they break down the intervention into distant setting strategies as well as antecedent or immediate trigger strategies?
Yes, we do have a whole section on setting events. We have an appendix on setting events, and we have an article. If you are interested in the article, I wrote an article with Cynthia Anderson and Terry Scott on consideration of setting events, when to consider them, how to identify them, and when to address them in your interventions and how to address them. Because we find that people, you sound like you know what setting events are. We do find that sometimes that's kind of confusing. So if you're interested in it, please email me. Again, go to the first slide. My email address is there, and I'd be happy to send you the article. Okay, thank you for letting me know, because I won't be looking at the chat while I'm talking. I can't do two things at once because I'll fail. And then also in PTR, we have a very structured way of helping teams to determine how to make decisions based on their data outcomes, which includes not only student outcomes, but also the implementation fidelity outcomes. We're not going to go over this whole thing, but this flow chart, just depending on whether you have effective outcomes or you don't have effective outcomes, you go in different directions and have different questions, and then based on your answers to those questions, it leads you to some areas of decisions that your team may possibly contemplate doing and implementing. So now it's time to talk about the Tier 3 intervention or support that you wrote down originally that you're doing. How comprehensive is it? Give us some ideas in the chat. Do you have everything you need to implement the intervention, which includes fidelity measures, data progress monitoring measures, ways of being able to implement it, ways to support the people who are implementing it? or there are a few things missing, and that's okay if there's a few things missing. Tell us what you wish the tier 3 strategy you wrote down had, and maybe think about, maybe we can figure out how to get that. Okay, you want to have access to specific worksheets to be able to complete, not just through the PowerPoint. You could definitely email me, Ashley. I'd be happy to send out our PTR tools, because when we do training, we give the PTR tools out. You might not understand completely how to use the tools in the way that we use them with Fidelity, but I am certainly okay with anyone having the tools. We made them to share with people. And then if you have questions and are interested, if you're here in Florida especially, you can contact your PBIS person, because there may be a way for your district to get training. Okay, so the other thing I could do is put the PTR tools, Therese and Betsy, maybe we could just put the PTR tools somewhere where they can download them through this chat, because if everybody wants one, I probably will miss somebody in an email, and I'll never look at the chat again, maybe. I would think you would hope I would, but I
We
know
can certainly do that, Rose.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry, Betsy, go ahead. I was just going to say, Rose, we just had to touch base with you about any restrictions on the publication rights, like the copyright. But we can absolutely find a workaround for that and follow up directly with the people who registered for today's chat.
Yeah, the tools that I give out are tools I give out to training, so that she's talking about, we have a PTR manual or a book that's published by Brooks. The tools that I have, some of them are a bit different because I always change them from what the book has. And I also have high school versions and student versions of the tools in the handout. So it'll be fine. I give them to mostly everybody.
Beautiful. Then we will get those into a private live binder, and we can email out the link and the password to that private binder to everyone who attended today.
Right. And for those of you who say, yeah, you can purchase the manual if you want to spend money, sure, you can purchase the manual. It's if you just Google PTR and Amazon, or you could email me. I guess I didn't put all the publications that we have on this training. You can email me and I can tell you there's a more recent edition that was just published in 2019, the second edition of PTR. But I like my forms better than what they do with the PTR manual, but the PTR manual would take you through everything, and also has the appendices and everything like that. So if you really want, you could probably find it cheaper on Amazon than on Brooks. Okay, well, it looks like mostly people wanted to get those forms instead of telling me what they're doing. So we're going to move ahead and we're going to start with you again. Laura, why don't you go ahead and talk about the customizable feature?
Sure, thank you. All right, so when we think about our tier 3 interventions, we want them to be evidence-based, which means that they're actually going to work. And then we also think about them being manualized, which PTR is a great example of that. So you want to make sure that people can use the same sort of strategies across different settings, across different staff, and across different students. But you also want to have them be flexible so that you can individualize to meet a specific student needs, because tier 3 is really about that individual student. Next slide. So here's an example from Jeff. We've been following Jeff all the way through, and here's some of the teach strategies, so the T part of PTR. So we had decided that we wanted him to have academic engagement, and we describe up here, this is coming in from different forms and continuing along. So he's going to be remain engaged, and what that is. And then it breaks it down into different, almost like a task analysis of what that's going to look like for Jeff. And again, across, it's unique to Jeff, so specific for what he would need, but it also can be done across different staff members. For example, we're going to divide his writing task into 3 major sections, and then we're going to have a form that we'll show you next that will include that. So for example, here is our dots. We have our work completion chart for Jeff. He would be able to eventually self-manage, so be able to check this off in the as he goes along. In the beginning, perhaps a teacher or a staff person can kind of help him do this. So you can kind of phase it in. But overall, we have the goal of what he's going to do to get the dots, and the dots are at the top, they're little stickers. The goal is going to be to increase on-task behavior, and that at the bottom what those are. And for Jeff, we've included visuals because he sort of needs that extra level of what this looks like. And then we've broken it down into those steps we saw on that teach part with the starter sentences, detail sentences, conclusion statement, and we have it by day. So then he would check off when he's able to do that. If he gets through the day, he would be able to get a dot. And eventually, if he gets a certain number of dots per week, which again can be customizable based off of his needs at that time, he would get a big reward, which he's chosen, which is to read to his brother's kindergarten class. So again, you can see like how we can customize this to his specific needs, but it can follow across multiple settings.
Thanks, Laura. Before I go to the next one, Laura got the enviable job of explaining an intervention that we had developed. So she did a great job. Just to let you know, because his function was escape, I want to make sure people understand, because they always ask, how can you, like you're teaching him to be academically engaged. How does he get escape by being academically engaged? He actually can earn 5 dots during writing. This intervention was only done during the writing time because that was where they had the most problems. And in PTR, we usually have teachers select the routine in which they're going to start doing an intervention, as opposed to doing it over the entire day because they get overwhelmed often. And we always recommend that. They appreciate us recommending it. And if he has the starter sentence, detail sentence, conclusion statement, is on task, and if he met his goal, because every day they're going to negotiate a goal with him for completing his writing, he gets a dot for each of those that he has a yes. He puts the dots in his envelope, and what can he do with those dots? Well, later that day, as soon as he has dots, or the next day or wherever, if he gets a paper or something, he goes, I don't want to do this, because he doesn't like to do anything involving writing, remember. He can whip out one of those dots, take it off its sticky backing, stick that dot over that problem and say, I'm not doing it. The teacher will say, that's good, you earned that dot, so you don't have to do that. So that's how he's getting escape by being academically engaged. I do have to tell you, I taught Jeff the strategy, and you would think kids would catch on like, well, I don't have to work. I just keep on being disruptive. But he looked at me and goes, can I use all my dots on one piece of paper? And I said, you sure can, but then you're going to run out of dots. So then you're going to, you'll have to work. He goes, but I can get more dots. I said, well, how are you going to get more dots? And he said, well, I'm going to write a starter sentence. I'm going to do a detail sentence. I'm going to raise my hand. He just went through the whole thing. So he got it, and we tricked him, and he hoarded his dots, by the way. So sorry, Laura, I just wanted to give everybody the idea of how he used those dots to actually escape.
No problem. And so then this one is the part of the reinforcement strategy. So the R part, he's going to be reinforced for the academic engagement and meeting his daily dot allotment. And then it says, when are we going to reinforce it? If he uses a dot to get out of work, we include that specific phrase, and tying it into function, used it to get out of whatever task, you earned that. If he meets that weekly goal, he gets to go to his brother's kindergarten class. We also had that part of using that intervention chart to be able to ask him and to reflect, did you meet your goal? How many dots did you make? So overall, if you look at those 3 components, again, manualized, but at the same time, you're able to individualize it for Jeff's needs to make it customizable. So now, again, if you have a chance to put into the chat box, how does your tier 3 interventions, how are they customizable and individualized for your students? How are they meeting the functions that your students are having to have their behaviors?
We are having a long time delay here. How about this? You think about it, you could be writing about, because I noticed we only have 13 minutes left, and I'm going to start talking about it. And Laura, you can let me know if I'm not supposed to be the next person. Do I talk about Coachable?
No, you're going. Go ahead.
Okay. So the 4th C feature is coachable. If you want teachers or families or whomever is going to be implementing the intervention, the individualized intervention, they have to be coached. I don't know of too many people who have the skills, capacity, and the self-efficacy to immediately take something that's either in a PowerPoint presentation or maybe just talked about in a meeting and be able to go ahead and do it. So your individualized support should be one that has a process for how does the teacher or family or the person who is doing this get the support. If it's a school psychologist or behavior specialist, as one of you was talking about not being on the same page, there should be a component about how do you coach them to work with the teams? How do you coach them to do a process with fidelity that guides a whole team to come to consensus? And so the fidelity should also be, the coaching should also be ongoing. It shouldn't be a one-shop, one-time deal, but it's an ongoing support process so that people can develop and increase capacity. So it shouldn't be this. I'm sure some of you have seen the Steelbird cartoon before. I'm back from training. I got a big binder. The training's already forgotten, but the binder will last forever. A living monument to temporary knowledge. I don't know about you, but I have a bookshelf of binders. That's something I have to clean out. And I haven't opened but some of those binders for years. I'm almost afraid to open. Who knows what's crawled into them. But again, those binders and PowerPoint presentations are not the best way if you want people to actually implement interventions. So they're not the best professional development. They're necessary. They're a good way of getting everybody on the same page and understanding some main ideas and content. However, if you want people to turn that around and implement it, you do have to provide coaching. And so in PTR, an example how we do this is we use behavioral skills training, as mentioned before, to train the teacher to do the plan. And then we use practice-based coaching in order to support the teacher while they're implementing the plan until we come to the table again to look at the data and make data-based decision. And this is giving you the actual process of behavioral skills training where we provide them with instructions, we model the intervention, we then have the teacher practice that we usually through role play, and we provide feedback. When we're doing practice-based coaching, we use teacher reflection forms in order to be able to say what went well and what was difficult this week so we can provide some really nice performance feedback and get some improvement. This is an example of Jeff's coaching fidelity plan. So we said that PTR has fidelity plan. Now this is the simpler version of fidelity, which probably most schools would like a lot more than the one that I showed you before, but I showed you the more, the Cadillac or the Mercedes-Benz, let's say, of our fidelity plans, which includes just about anything you'd want to measure with fidelity. This one, if you just want to get basic adherence, did the person implement the steps or not? This is another version we have in PTR. And so this just breaks down his interventions. I didn't show you his prevention interventions because of time, but he had 2 prevention interventions on his plan. They provided him choices, and they did that, they had a timer that one of those visual timers so that he could see whether or not he was meeting his goal that was set on his teach intervention for completing his writing assignment during writing time. And this can, not only can we use this to coach the teacher, so when we give this to the teacher, we go in and we train and we model all of these steps, and then we ask the teacher to role play by, we'll pretend we're Jeff, you do this now as if I'm Jeff, and let's see if you can go through these steps. We can measure them during the coaching, whether or not they did the steps and feel comfortable doing it. Then when they're going and doing the intervention, they can either self-assess. This is, I've had a lot of teachers tell me they like this because it allows them to have a visual cue of the steps they have to do. It gets everybody on the same page. So if they're an ESC teacher, a special ed teacher, they have 2 instructional aides. They all use the same plan. They're all doing the same thing. They also are able, if the coach comes in to observe, the coach uses the same form. And then they review and provide performance feedback. That last column, they're able to evaluate whether or not that intervention seems to have any impact on the behavior. And that helps us also in making decisions later on and knowing what to fade out, what to keep, what to strengthen. This is an example of an implementation reflection form. Now, this is from a different project, but since I was on both research projects, some of the things that we're doing is share, but this is a way of getting the teacher to say what went well with your plan, what was difficult to implement with your plan. So that's much better than going in and saying, well, you didn't do this right. I didn't observe you doing this. Instead, what was difficult about the plan? And you know, that you seem to do a pretty good job. I can see where that's tough to do that. Let's talk about how we might be able to make this easier for you to do. Teachers are so much more appreciative of that kind of coaching than you going in and saying, you didn't do this right. You need to do this. Is what we wrote. You need to start doing this. And then they get to decide, like, how well is this plan going on the behavior, and how well do I think I implement the plan? And so we have examples in our coaching manual. We do have examples for how coaches can coach people. And this is how we are able to give feedback. So we have a systematic process that helps people give feedback in a way that starts with a positive, and then the third time goes into about the third or fourth step, you talk about corrective feedback, so that teachers are very welcoming of it, and it's not considered a critique of their performance. Instead, it is considered supportive. So we're not going to have time to talk about coaching stuff. If there is anything that you can think about, though, if you want to put it in the chat box, we will look at it later and be able to answer some of those questions. And if we have any time at the end, we'll answer questions. We'll stay on past 3:30 if we're allowed to, if anybody still wants questions that don't want to hop off right away. And then Laura, I'm sorry, I can't look at my original thing. Am I talking about contextual fit, or are you?
No, you're bringing us to the end. I think this might be the last.
Okay, and I could talk really fast and get done fast. Contextual fit's our final C. I'm a behavior analyst, and I work with a lot of people who are behavior analysts and behavior specialists. And I also work a lot with school psychologists, and we help problem solve implementation of behavioral supports. And often what I get from people is, well, we do this, but teachers won't implement the strategies. And I used to be a teacher a long time ago, and I work with a lot of teachers, and sometimes they actually come to some of my trainings. And sometimes what I see happens is what they're given is something that they may not understand how to implement, or are not sure how to implement, or it is so complex. I have seen some plans given to teachers that are actually 40 pages long. And I'm like, who can do this unless this is all you do and you only have this one student the entire day? So interventions have to consider, when you're doing tier 3, the context. Are they feasible? Are they doable? Yeah, you might have to sacrifice a little bit of the purity of the behavioral science at times, but it doesn't do any good if you're sticking to the technical qualities of an intervention if that teacher's never going to be able to feasibly implement it. So we do have to think of, as coaches and as people who are supporting teachers or supporting school psychologists and other people to implement a process, an FBA BIP process, like what can we do that's going to honor the science but still have contextual fit in where this is going to be implemented? Because without the feasibility and acceptability, it is not going to be implemented. So that is why in PTR, we came up with what we call our iBurst, our progress monitoring tool, which some people love, and most teachers love it. I'm going to skip through these because this is just telling you the research evidence of its inter-rater agreement as well as its validity. But it is a direct behavior rating, somewhat similar to what you do in check-in and check-out, but it's individualized for each student. So this is not Jeff's, I apologize, this is Mike's. I should have substituted Jeff's in here instead of Mike's, but this will still give you the idea as we write behaviors that are identified as being the focus of our PTR intervention. And we start this at baseline. So we start after the first meeting when we identified and defined the behaviors. We have the teacher identify when they're going to be identifying the measurement, when are they going, over what time span, over the whole day, a specific routine, a specific activity. How are they going to do it? Is it going to be number of screaming events? How long screaming lasts? Maybe the intensity of the screaming, and then the Likert scale from 1 to 5, with 1 meaning it's a really, really bad day, and 5 means it's a really, really bad day, and a 1 is a really, really good day. We have them provide the estimates. This is also, if any of you are in Florida and you have access to using the RTIB database, which is from the PBIS project, and there is a demo, I'm sure Teresa will be very glad to give you the link to be able to go practice it and see what it is. This is also the framework of the RTIB database. So there's an easy, free way for being able to get teachers access to this. What's nice about this is it takes 5 seconds for a teacher to complete. So at the end of the day, for Mike, for example, the teacher will think about how was screaming today. Was screaming, did I think there were 9 or more events? It was a pretty bad day, I'm going to circle 5. Was a typical bad day? I'm going to circle 4. Each of these ratings have a meaning. When you get the PTR tools handout, there is a script for how to set up the iBurst that's included in the handout. But since this only takes 5 seconds for a teacher, we're able to get teachers to take data. It's not meant to replace systematic direct observation, but it is a nice, different way for teachers who might not be able to get trained to do direct observation in the way with fidelity that we would like them to do, to be able to collect data for us. So this is an example of Mike with a screaming behavior, with 5s meaning a lot of screaming, 1 meaning fantastic day, hardly no screaming. And you can see that this is a graph using the iBurst, and even though there's only 5 data points, we're able to evaluate this. Here's where in the middle they did an intervention, and we could tell from that intervention that was implemented, it did not work. And the teacher was doing it with fidelity. So there was something wrong with the intervention because the graph looks exactly the same as baseline. If you look at that second dotted line, we changed the intervention there to address his escape behavior instead of attention because we had the wrong function. And look, all of a sudden we're seeing a lot of 1s in a row, a couple of good days. We're seeing a couple of blips here and there, but we are on the whole seeing much, much better behavior. And one of the things from Mike, his intervention was only being done during transition times, but his behavior happened in other routines and other circumstances. And so this is kind of nice to see, even though they were taking the data across the entire day, that just doing an intervention and a few transitions resulted in the day looking much better. This is his hitting, he had hitting behaviors. Hitting basically disappeared. And you can again look at the iBurst ratings to be able to make decisions. That's what the important thing is you have a snapshot. This is a feasible contextual fit. The intervention descriptions, again, that we gave, being able to select the interventions, asking the teacher the questions, how are you going to do this? Because when we do the task analysis, we as the coach don't tell them what to do. We ask the teacher, when is it going to be easier to do this? Before the assignment being given to Dawn or after the assignment being given to Dawn? And we write down what they say, but we know what questions to ask them. So now what we have is we have a teacher who described the intervention he or she is able to implement in their setting. So just remember, in closing, education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world. One of my favorite quotes. And we're right at 3:30. I'd be happy to stick around for a few extra minutes if there's a burning question you have or a comment. Teresa, I know you and Betsy have been looking at everything. If you wanted to alert Laura and me to something that we need to address right now before we sign off. Oh boy, they must have been asking about the database. Rebecca,
you just saw the notes.
Well, no, I think most of the questions have been answered. I don't think there were any that were lingering. Did you see any, Therese?
Not so far. I was pretty aggressive there about interrupting Rose when we had a question come up. So thanks for that, Rose.
Yes, thank you guys so much for that wonderful presentation. And thank you all for being such great participants. We just have one more poll that we're going